If a terrified child ran up to you in the middle of the night, blood on his shirt, gasping for air, what would you do? Stay until the end, because what happens next is something no one could have predicted. The boy's bare feet pounded against the pavement, the sharp gravel cutting into his skin as he ran. His breath came in ragged, uneven gasps, his chest heaving. The night air was thick, suffocating, pressing down on him like an unseen force. He didn't dare look back. He could still hear them, their voices, their footsteps, closer than before. A car appeared ahead, headlights slicing through the darkness. A police cruiser. He stumbled toward it, arms flailing. "Please, help me!" His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper at first, then rising into a desperate scream. Officer Daniel Pierce had seen plenty in his 14 years on the force. Domestic disputes, armed robberies, even a body or two. But never had he seen something like this. A kid barely 12 years old, shirt soaked in blood, running toward him with wild, haunted eyes. Pierce barely had time to react before the boy collapsed against the car door, gripping the handle as if it were the only thing tethering him to reality. His breath was fast, erratic. "They took them! They took them!" he sobbed, his small hands clutching the fabric of Pierce's uniform. Pierce dropped to one knee, steadying the boy. "Hey, slow down, kid. Who took who?" The boy's gaze darted to the darkness behind him. His whole body trembled. "They said they'd come back for me." A shiver crawled up Pierce's spine. Blood, panic, and a promise of return. "What's your name?" The boy swallowed hard. "Owen," he whispered. "Owen Carter." Pierce stiffened. He knew that name. Everyone in town did. Owen Carter, son of Matthew Carter, the city's wealthiest real estate mogul. If something had happened to the Carter family, this wasn't just a random crime. This was big. "Where's your dad, Owen?" The boy's lips trembled. "On the floor," he choked, not moving. Pierce's fingers hovered over his radio. Protocol said to call it in immediately, but instinct told him to wait. Something wasn't right. "Who took them?" he asked. Owen's hands clenched into fists. 3 men, masks. One of them was huge like a wrestler. Another had a limp. His voice dropped as if saying it too loudly would make it real. "They knew my mom's name. They knew mine too." Pierce's heart pounded. This wasn't random. He eased the car door open. "Get in, Owen. We're going to your house." The boy didn't move. What if they're still there? Pierce hesitated. That was a real possibility. If this was a professional job, the kidnappers wouldn't have left loose ends. And yet, Owen was alive. They had let him go. Why? The pieces didn't fit. "Get in," Pierce repeated, firmer this time. Owen obeyed, sliding into the passenger seat, his body rigid as he clutched the seatbelt. His breath was uneven, his fingers fidgeting. Pierce hit the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they sped toward the Carter estate. $1 million home, sitting on acres of land at the edge of the city. Normally, a fortress. Tonight, a crime scene. As they pulled into the long driveway, Pierce immediately sensed something was wrong. The front door was open, but not broken, not kicked in. Someone had unlocked it. He parked and turned to Owen. "Stay here." Owen's face went pale. "No, don't go in alone." Pierce hesitated. Every instinct told him the same thing. Something isn't right. Hand resting on his holstered weapon, he stepped out. The house loomed over him, eerily silent. No movement, no sound, until a low creak. From inside, Pierce froze. Not a natural creak, not the house settling. Footsteps inside. His radio crackled. "Dispatch, we have a report of." A sharp click sounded behind him. Not from the house, from the passenger seat. Pierce turned, just in time to see Owen's small hands gripping his father's spare handgun, aimed directly at him. Pierce's breath hitched. "Owen." The boy's expression changed. The terror, the panic, all gone. His hands stopped shaking. His wide, tear-filled eyes had lied to him the entire time. And then, for the first time, Owen Carter smiled. What just happened? Is Owen a victim, or something much worse? What was real and what was a trap? Comment below with your thoughts, and don't miss the next part, because the truth is just getting started. The house was too quiet. Officer Daniel Pierce stood at the base of the grand staircase, his pulse hammering in his ears. His hand hovered over his weapon, fingers twitching against the cold metal grip. A house like this, massive, luxurious, built like a fortress, shouldn't have been this silent. Not after what had just happened. A faint breeze stirred through the open front door behind him, making the chandelier above sway ever so slightly. The lights flickered. Somewhere deep in the house, wood creaked. He wasn't alone. His instincts screamed at him to move, to clear the house before someone, before something, found him first. But then, a sound, a groan. It came from the base of the stairs. Pierce turned, his grip tightening on his gun. A figure lay sprawled on the floor, half hidden in the shadows. A man, blood pooling beneath him, his breath shallow and labored. Michael Carter. Pierce rushed forward, dropping to one knee beside the man. His face was bruised, his temples smeared with dark crimson. His hands trembled, his fingers barely twitching against the polished wood floor. But he was alive. "Michael," Pierce said, voice low, urgent. "Can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered. He sucked in a jagged breath, his lips parted, struggling to form words. "They took them." Pierce's stomach twisted. "Who?" he pressed. Michael coughed, pain rippling through his body. "Julia, Lily." A pause, a shuddering inhale. "Owen." Owen. The name sent a cold shock through Pierce's veins. He twisted sharply, eyes locking onto the police cruiser parked outside. The boy was still inside, still sitting in the passenger seat, still watching. Pierce's breath caught. Owen wasn't crying anymore. He wasn't shaking. He was staring, his wide eyes locked on Pierce through the windshield. For the first time since this nightmare had begun, something in Pierce's gut told him he had made a terrible mistake. A whisper of movement to his left snapped his focus back inside. Upstairs. A soft thud. Pierce's head snapped toward the darkened hallway above. He rose slowly, careful not to make a sound. Michael was unconscious again, too weak to help. Owen was outside. That meant another creak. Closer this time. His fingers curled tighter around the grip of his gun. The house wasn't empty. He moved toward the staircase, stepping over the shattered picture frames littering the floor. His heartbeat pounded in sync with every slow, deliberate step. Then a shadow shifted at the top of the stairs. Pierce froze. Someone was there. A tall figure, half hidden in the darkness, just beyond the glow of the flickering hallway light. Pierce lifted his gun. "Police!" His voice was firm, steady, but his gut told him he was already too late. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't run. A chill crept down Pierce's spine. He knew that stance. He'd seen it before. Not fear, control. This wasn't some panicked intruder. This was someone who belonged here. His finger hovered over the trigger. Step forward, slowly. Silence, a single breath. Then, the light above flickered again. And when it did, the shadow was gone. A door slammed somewhere deeper inside the house. Pierce lunged up the stairs, taking them two at a time. He reached the top, pivoting sharply toward the hallway. The bedroom door stood open, the long corridor stretching into darkness. Gone. Whoever had been there had vanished. A sick feeling settled in his stomach. This wasn't just a break-in. This was a game. And he was already one step behind. A gust of wind blew through the open front door downstairs, sending a stack of papers fluttering across the floor. Pierce turned back, eyes scanning the shadows. His instincts were screaming at him now, louder than ever. Something was deeply wrong here. Then, a voice, a whisper. Pierce went still. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A child's voice, soft, fractured, close. "Officer?" Pierce turned sharply, gun raised. But there was no one there. No child, no voice. Just the empty hallway and the cold weight of a house that no longer felt like a home. Outside, a car engine rumbled. Not his. Pierce's breath hitched as he whirled toward the window. The police cruiser. Owen. But the passenger seat was empty. His blood turned to ice. Pierce spun, bolting down the stairs, reaching the door just in time to see the taillights of a dark SUV disappearing down the long driveway. Owen was gone. And this time, he had gone willingly. Was Owen ever really in danger, or was he leading the officer into a trap from the very beginning? Stay tuned, because the real nightmare is only just unfolding. The police station was buzzing with noise. Phones ringing, officers talking in clipped voices, keyboards clacking. But for Officer Daniel Pierce, everything felt muffled. Distant, like he was underwater, drowning in the weight of his own mistakes. Owen was gone. Not taken. Not dragged away screaming. He had left. Willfully. Pierce sat at his desk, staring blankly at the case file in front of him. His mind kept replaying the last glimpse he had of the boy, the way Owen had watched him from the passenger seat, silent, calculating. And then the SUV, the taillights vanishing into the night. A boy who had begged for help hours ago had disappeared without a fight. Why? Pierce, a voice snapped him out of it. Detective Elena Vasquez stood beside him, arms crossed, her dark eyes sharp. "Tell me you have something." Pierce exhaled slowly. "Michael Carter is in surgery, severe head trauma, but the doctors say he'll make it." His fingers tapped against the desk. Still no word on Julia or Lily. Vasquez pulled out a chair, dropping a stack of crime scene photos in front of him. "Forensics just finished at the Carter house." She slid one toward him. "Look at this." Pierce's eyes narrowed. The image showed the living room, overturned furniture, broken glass, blood smears, but something else stood out. A footprint. Not a man's. Too small. He stiffened. "That's a kid's shoe." Vasquez nodded grimly. "Size matches Owen's." Pierce clenched his jaw. "So you're saying?" "I'm saying there's a chance Owen wasn't just running from the kidnappers." She hesitated. "He might have been running from what he did." A heavy silence fell between them. "That doesn't make sense," Pierce muttered. "Why would he fake being terrified? Why would he lie about what happened?" Vasquez's expression was unreadable. Maybe he didn't lie about everything. She tapped another photo. "Check this out." A close-up of the ransom note. Pierce had read it before. $500,000. No cops. 48 hours. But now he noticed something else. The handwriting. The way the letters slanted. The slightly uneven spacing. His stomach turned. "It looks like a kid wrote this," he murmured. Vasquez nodded. "We're running tests now, but if that's Owen's handwriting, then this isn't a kidnapping." Pierce finished, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "This is something else." His hands balled into fists. What the hell was going on? A sharp knock interrupted them. The uniformed officer poked his head in. Surveillance footage from a gas station on Highway 17 just came in. Pierce was already on his feet. "Show me." The grainy footage played on the screen. The dark SUV pulled into the gas station. Two figures stepped out, a man in a dark hoodie and Owen. Pierce's breath caught. The boy wasn't struggling. He wasn't scared. He followed the man inside like it was normal, like it was planned. The timestamp read 30 minutes after he disappeared. Then, something even stranger happened. Owen walked straight to the counter. The cashier, a teenage girl, barely glanced up. He said something, reached into his pocket, and slid something across the counter. A piece of paper. Pierce's heart pounded as the girl took it, read it, and nodded. Then she handed Owen something small. He pocketed it. The man in the hoodie gave him a barely perceptible nod before they both turned and left. "What the hell was that?" Vasquez muttered. Pierce's pulse was racing. "Rewind it." The officer did. Pierce squinted at the screen. He could barely make out the words written on the note Owen had passed to the cashier. 3 words, "Not who you think." A chill ran down his spine. Pierce turned to Vasquez. "We need to find that cashier." 10 minutes later, they were speeding toward the gas station. Sirens off, the tension in the car suffocating. Vasquez gripped the steering wheel tight. If Owen had the chance to ask for help, why didn't he say where his mom and sister were? Pierce stared out the window, jaw tight, because he didn't need saving. Vasquez glanced at him. "You really think he's involved?" Pierce hesitated. Nothing made sense. The blood on Owen's shirt, the terrified screams, the way he had begged Pierce, but then the SUV, the gas station, the note. Something inside him whispered, "You're looking at this all wrong." The gas station came into view. Vasquez pulled in fast, tires crunching on gravel. The neon open sign buzzed dimly in the window. They stepped inside. The teenage cashier, freckled face, earbuds in, barely 18, looked up from her phone. Vasquez flashed her badge. "We need to talk." The girl's face paled. I just don't lie," Pierce cut in. "Owen Carter gave you something. What was it?" She swallowed, glanced at the security cameras, then back at them. He told me to give it to you." Pierce's stomach twisted. "What?" The girl fumbled behind the counter, pulling out a small envelope. "He said you'd come." Pierce took it. Inside was a single Polaroid. His heart stopped. It was a picture of Julia and Lily Carter. They were alive, but it wasn't just the image that sent ice through his veins. It was what was written on the bottom. "Don't trust anyone, not even me." Vasquez exhaled sharply. "What the hell does that mean?" Pierce's hands trembled as he stared at the note. Owen Carter wasn't missing. He was leading them somewhere, and Pierce had a feeling he wasn't going to like where. Owen is gone, but did he escape, or was he always meant to leave? And more importantly, who is really in control here? Keep reading, because the darkest secrets are yet to come. The room was dim. the air thick with the stench of gasoline and sweat. Julia Carter's wrists ached from the rough rope binding her hands behind her back. Every movement sent sharp pain through her shoulders, but she kept still, pressing herself against the damp concrete wall, her heartbeat a steady drum in her ears. Beside her, Lily clung to her side, small fingers gripping Julia's torn blouse. The little girl hadn't spoken in hours. Her blue eyes, wide and terrified, darted between the three men standing a few feet away, their hushed voices growing tense. They were arguing. "We should have just taken the money and left," the man with the limp spat. His voice was sharp, desperate. "You're dragging this out too long, Victor." Victor, the leader. He turned slowly, exuding an unsettling calm. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his face partially hidden by shadows. "And you think running scared will get us paid?" His voice was smooth, too controlled, too certain. "They're not just valuable for ransom, Dean. They're leverage. The more time we have, the more pressure we put on Carter. That's how this works." Dean shifted uneasily, his fingers tapping against his thigh. "I'm telling you, something feels off. The kid got away too easy." Julia's breath hitched. "Owen." She kept her expression blank, forcing herself to stay quiet. Victor scoffed. "Relax. The boy was a scared little brat. He ran because he was weak. That's what kids do." But Dean shook his head. "Nah, I don't buy it." His gaze flickered toward Julia. "His mother ain't weak. I don't think the kid is either." Julia fought to keep her breathing steady. If they suspected Owen was more than a frightened child, he wouldn't just be missing, he'd be dead. Lily tensed against her, her tiny hands tightening around Julia's sleeve. Julia responded by shifting her weight, a silent reassurance. Victor sighed, rubbing his temple. "You always do this, Dean. Get jumpy. Get soft." His eyes darkened. "Maybe you're the one who needs to be reminded how this works." Dean swallowed hard. Julia didn't dare breathe. A long silence stretched between them before Victor finally turned away, stepping toward the metal table at the center of the room. The dim bulb above cast harsh shadows as he rifled through a duffel bag, his fingers grazing over a loaded pistol before settling on a burner phone. He typed something quickly. A message to Carter. Then, a smirk curled at the edge of his lips. "New terms," he muttered. "Let's see how desperate Daddy really is." The air shifted. Julia sensed it before it happened. Victor's mood had turned. The men around him were just as dangerous, but he was the one to fear. Lily whimpered softly, pressing her face into Julia's side. Victor's eyes snapped to them. "You should be grateful, you know," he said, tilting his head. "Your husband's stupidity is the only reason you're here. If he had played his cards right years ago, none of this would be happening." Julia stiffened. Years ago? A deep, sickening realization unfurled in her gut. "This isn't about money, is it?" she said, her voice hoarse. "This is personal." Victor's smirk widened. But Dean's reaction was different. His eyes flickered toward her, then away, as if he knew something Victor hadn't meant to reveal. Her stomach turned. Michael knew these men. But before she could process it, the door to the warehouse creaked open. Heavy boots echoed against the concrete floor. A fourth man entered, and Julia's blood ran cold. He wasn't like the others. He didn't wear a mask. He didn't bother hiding his face at all, because he didn't have to. She knew him. His name left her lips in a breathless whisper. "No." Lily looked up at her, confused by the sudden fear in her mother's voice. The man smiled. "Hello, Julia," he said, voice dripping with satisfaction. "It's been a long time." And just like that, she understood. This wasn't about Michael's money, it was about revenge. What's more terrifying, being taken for ransom or realizing the person holding you captive has been waiting years to do it? Stay tuned, because revenge is a patient game. The dim light flickered against the stained concrete walls, casting long, jagged shadows. Julia Carter forced herself to keep breathing evenly, though her chest ached with the effort. Across the room, Victor was still smirking, his fingers drumming against the metal table. But Julia wasn't looking at him anymore. She was staring at the man who had just walked in. Trevor Blake. His presence made the air in the room shift, tightening like a noose around her throat. He hadn't changed much in the years since she'd last seen him, his sharp, calculating eyes, the same cruel smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. She had prayed she'd never have to see that face again. She swallowed hard. "You." Trevor's smile widened. "Me." Her heart pounded. "This isn't about money," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. This is about Michael. Victor chuckled from behind her. She's quick. Trevor stepped closer, his hand sliding into his pockets like he was casually catching up with an old friend. You always were smart, Julia. That's what made this fun. Lily stirred against her, pressing closer. Julia instinctively shifted, shielding her daughter with her body. What do you want? Trevor exhaled like he was bored. I want what's mine. She clenched her jaw. Michael doesn't owe you anything. His eyes darkened. No? I built his empire, and when I caught him skimming off the top, he turned on me, fed me to the wolves. Do you know what prison is like, Julia? Of course you don't, but your husband does, because he put me there. A chill spread through her limbs. Michael had never talked about this. He had mentioned a former business partner, someone he had cut ties with after discovering fraud, but he had never said a name, never told her how deep it had gone. And now that man was standing in front of her, holding her and her daughter hostage. Let us go. She forced out. This isn't between me and you. Trevor crouched down, his voice soft, almost gentle. See, that's where you're wrong. Your family took everything from me. His gaze flickered to Lily, his expression unreadable. And now I'm taking something from yours. Julia's blood turned to ice. She lunged before she even knew what she was doing. She'd barely made it an inch before Victor grabbed her by the hair and yanked her backward. She hit the floor hard, pain bursting through her shoulder. Lily screamed, scrambling toward her. Trevor sighed, shaking his head. And here I thought we could have a civilized conversation. Julia struggled against Victor's grip, her breath coming in ragged gasps. If you touch her, Michael will kill you. Trevor's smirk returned. Michael doesn't have to know, not if we make it look like an accident. Lily sobbed, clinging to Julia's arm. Dean, the one with the limp, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the plan, he muttered. Trevor glanced at him. Plans change. Julia forced herself to meet his gaze. You want revenge? Fine, but leave my daughter out of this. Trevor studied her, tilting his head slightly as if considering something. Then, finally, he shrugged. All right, here's the deal. Michael has until tomorrow to bring me the money. His smirk deepened. If he doesn't, you leave this place in pieces. A new kind of fear gripped Julia's chest. Trevor turned to Victor. Move them to the secondary location. Victor nodded, already pulling Julia to her feet. Dean hesitated. His eyes flickered toward Lily, then back at Julia. There was something in his expression, a crack in the armor. Doubt, and she saw it. She locked eyes with him, speaking low enough so only he could hear. You don't want to do this. Dean clenched his jaw, looked away. It's not my choice. Victor pushed them forward, leading them out of the room. Julia knew one thing. No one was coming to save them. If they were getting out of this, she would have to do it herself. Is Trevor really after money? Or is he playing a much deeper game? And more importantly, how far is he willing to go? Keep reading, because this is just the beginning. The van rattled violently as it sped down the desolate road, its headlights slicing through the thick darkness. Julia Carter could barely keep her balance, her body jerking with every sharp turn. The rope binding her wrists dug deeper into her skin, raw and burning. Across from her, Lily sat curled into a ball, her tiny hands gripping the frayed seatbelt. The air inside the van was suffocating. Victor was driving, his fingers drumming against the steering wheel like he was enjoying the ride. In the passenger seat, Trevor Blake sat with eerie stillness, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. Behind them, Dean shifted uncomfortably, the tension in his body clear. Julia didn't trust Dean, but she knew he was her only chance. Her mind raced, calculating. She couldn't wait for Michael to save them. She had seen the way Trevor spoke. This was never about ransom. Even if Michael paid, Trevor would take the money and leave them in a ditch. She had to act. Now. The van hit a pothole, sending Lily's small frame bouncing slightly. She whimpered, barely above a whisper. Julia's stomach twisted. You all right, sweetheart? She asked softly. Trevor chuckled under his breath. That's cute, like saying nice words will make any of this better. Julia clenched her jaw. You've got what you wanted. Let her go. Trevor turned slightly, his smirk catching in the dim light. And miss out on all the fun? Julia's nails dug into her palms. She had to keep him talking, distracted. Michael never even said your name, she lied. You think ruining his life means something? You were nothing to him. Trevor's expression darkened. His fingers twitched. Good. Let him get angry, let him lose control. You think I don't know that? Trevor muttered, voice low, sharp. I was loyal to him for years, helped build everything he has. And the second I was inconvenient, he threw me away. His jaw clenched. And you, he looked at Julia, his gaze sharp as glass. You just stood by his side, smiling like you had no clue what kind of man he really was. She held his stare. And what kind of man are you, Trevor? Trevor didn't answer. Dean cleared his throat. This is getting out of hand, he muttered. Trevor's eyes flicked to him. Relax, Dean, no one's dying yet. Yet. Julia swallowed hard. She could see Dean's fingers tapping against his leg, a nervous tick. He was scared. Maybe scared enough to listen. She leaned slightly, just enough for her voice to reach him. Help us. Dean stiffened. Victor scoffed. Ignore her, Dean. The van took another sharp turn. A sign flashed past the window. Julia barely caught it. Industrial district. They were close. Wherever they were taking her and Lily, they wouldn't have much time left. She glanced at Dean again. His fingers still drummed against his knee, his leg bouncing slightly. A man debating something dangerous. She took a risk. The biggest one yet. You have a daughter, don't you? She whispered. Dean's entire body went still. Trevor turned. What did you just say? Julia didn't hesitate. I saw the way you looked at Lily. Like you didn't want this. She held his gaze. Like you've got someone at home who calls you Dad. Victor laughed. Jesus, Dean, is that true? Dean's mouth opened slightly, then closed. Julia saw it, the crack in his armor. Trevor, however, wasn't amused. His hand twitched toward his gun. Don't start thinking with your heart, Dean. Julia pressed harder. Your daughter, what would she think of this? Dean exhaled shakily. He looked at Lily, then at Julia, then at the gun in Trevor's hand. A decision was made. Faster than anyone could react, Dean moved. Not toward Julia, not toward Lily. He lunged for Victor. The van swerved. Hard. Victor shouted, wrestling for control of the wheel. The tires screeched, the whole vehicle jerking sideways. Trevor cursed, grabbing for something, anything to hold on to. Julia didn't hesitate. She threw herself forward, shielding Lily as the van flipped. The world spun. A metallic crunch filled the air, glass shattering like falling ice. The force knocked the breath from Julia's lungs, and then silence. For a long moment, everything was still. Then, a groan. Julia blinked, pain radiating through her skull. The van was sideways, its doors bent inward from the impact. Smoke curled through the air. Lily. She turned, heart pounding. The little girl was still pressed against her side, eyes squeezed shut. Baby, look at me, Julia whispered, ignoring the searing pain in her ribs. Lily whimpered, but she was breathing. Movement. Victor coughed, struggling to push himself up. Dean, you. His voice cut off when he saw Dean. Dean lay slumped against the door, unconscious. Trevor groaned, his fingers twitching. He was still alive, but dazed. Julia didn't waste time. She moved fast, pushing through the shattered windshield, hauling Lily out with her. Her body screamed in protest, but she didn't stop. She ran. The cold air hit her like a slap. Gravel crunched beneath her bare feet. The industrial lot stretched ahead, warehouses, machinery, and darkness. She had no idea where they were, no idea where to go. But she didn't look back. She just ran. Because she knew one thing. Trevor wouldn't stay down for long. What's more terrifying, being trapped in a van with killers, or escaping into the unknown, knowing they'll come after you? Stay with us, because survival isn't the same as being safe. The night was colder than Julia Carter had expected. A sharp wind cut through her torn blouse, and the gravel beneath her bare feet sent jolts of pain through her legs. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. Behind her, the wreckage of the van smoldered. The industrial district stretched before her. Abandoned warehouses, rusting machinery, endless darkness. Lily's breaths came in quick, shallow gasps against Julia's chest as she clutched her daughter close. The little girl hadn't said a word since they crawled from the crash. She was in shock. And Julia? She was running on sheer instinct. Somewhere behind them, Trevor Blake was still alive. The thought sent a fresh wave of fear through her body. The crash had bought them time, but not much. Trevor wouldn't stay down forever, and when he got back up, he would be furious. Mommy, Lily finally whispered, her voice hoarse. Where do we go? Julia swallowed hard, scanning the endless rows of dark warehouses. If she ran blindly, she'd lead them straight into a dead end. She needed to think. She forced her mind to focus. Trevor had taken them somewhere near the docks. That meant The water. If she could reach it, maybe she could find a boat, a shipping container, something to hide in. She adjusted Lily's weight in her arms and pushed forward, keeping close to the shadowed side of a warehouse. Every step was agony. Her ribs ached from the crash, her feet bled, and exhaustion clawed at her mind. But she would not stop. A distant sound froze her in place. Footsteps, not far behind, heavy, uneven. Trevor. A chill shot down her spine. Then, another sound. Closer, faster, not Trevor. Her pulse spiked. Someone else was out here. She ducked behind a rusted shipping container, pressing Lily to her chest. The little girl trembled, fingers digging into Julia's arm. She risked a glance around the corner. A shadow moved between the buildings, not just one, two. Her heart pounded. They weren't alone. Then, a voice. Low. Male. You sure this is the right place? Julia's breath caught. They weren't with Trevor. They were looking for someone else. She gritted her teeth. That didn't make them allies. Lily whimpered, and Julia clamped a hand over her mouth, silently begging her to stay quiet. Footsteps grew louder. They were coming closer. She had two choices: run and risk being heard, or stay hidden and pray they passed. Neither was good enough. She needed another option. Her gaze darted around. Then, she saw it. A maintenance ladder bolted to the warehouse wall. It led to the roof. Her muscles screamed as she moved. Clutching Lily tight, she reached up and gripped the cold metal, pulling them both up. Every movement sent fire through her ribs, but she didn't stop. The voices got closer. She climbed faster. The moment she reached the top, she pulled Lily up, pressing them flat against the rooftop. Below, the two figures stepped into view. Julia's breath caught. One of them was Dean, the man who had turned against Trevor. The other man, a stranger, spoke first. If they're alive, they won't get far. Dean shook his head. Julia's smart. She'll find a way. The stranger scoffed. You sound worried. Dean's jaw clenched. I don't want a kid getting hurt. The stranger gave a slow, humorless chuckle. Then you picked the wrong side. Julia pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle her breathing. Dean was looking for them. But was he here to help or to finish the job? The stranger's radio crackled. We found the van. No sign of the woman or the kid. Julia's blood ran cold. Trevor was up. The stranger sighed. That means they're still out here. And if we find them first, he glanced at Dean, smirking. You willing to get your hands dirty? Or is this where you grow a conscience? Dean didn't answer. The stranger pulled a gun from his jacket. We'll split up. Find them before Trevor does. Julia's heart pounded. They weren't searching to save her. They were hunting her. She gripped Lily's trembling hand. They had to move. Now. She turned toward the far edge of the roof, her mind racing. They could drop down to the next building, get to the far side of the docks. A board beneath her creaked. Lily gasped. And below, Dean's head snapped up. Their eyes met. For one brief second, neither of them moved. Then, Dean's hand went to his gun. Julia didn't wait to see what he'd do next. She grabbed Lily and ran. What's worse, being hunted by your enemy, or realizing the only person who might help you once worked for him? Keep reading, because trust is the most dangerous game of all. The rooftop was slick with condensation, the metal grates groaning beneath Julia Carter's weight as she pulled Lily toward the edge. Her muscles screamed in protest, her ribs felt like they were on fire, but she couldn't stop. Below, Dean stood frozen, one hand hovering near his gun. His eyes locked onto hers, filled with something unreadable. Was it hesitation? Guilt? A warning? Then the other man spoke. What is it? Dean didn't turn. Nothing. Keep moving. Julia's breath caught. He let them go. But for how long? She didn't wait to find out. She reached the ledge, crouching low, scanning the other side. The rooftop dipped down to another building, a lower warehouse, its rusted metal roof barely 10 feet below. A dangerous drop, but survivable. She pulled Lily close. Listen to me, she whispered, cupping the little girl's face. I need you to be brave. We're going to jump, okay? Lily's lip trembled, but she nodded. Julia exhaled, tightening her grip. Then, without another second of doubt, she leapt. The impact sent a jolt of pain up her legs, her knees nearly buckling as she hit the metal. Lily gasped, but Julia held her tight, rolling to absorb the impact. Behind them, voices shouted. Dean was covering for them, but the others weren't blind. A bullet cracked against the metal near her foot. Julia's heart lurched. They were shooting now. She scrambled forward, pushing Lily ahead, their bodies silhouetted against the glow of the industrial district's flickering floodlights. The edge of the roof was near, too near. Then she saw it. A rusted fire escape ladder, barely holding on to the side of the building. She didn't think. She just grabbed Lily, swung her legs over the side and climbed. Footsteps thundered above them. The gunman had made it to the rooftop. Another shot rang out. The bullet sparked against the metal rungs just inches from Julia's head. Lily screamed. Julia gritted her teeth and climbed faster. Her hands were slick with sweat, her muscles trembling from exhaustion. Her feet slipped, and for one terrifying second she thought she'd fall. Then a hand grabbed her wrist. She gasped, instinctively pulling Lily closer. But it wasn't the gunman. It was Dean. He had reached the bottom of the ladder, his grip tight on her arm. His expression was hard, unreadable. "Run," he rasped. Julia hesitated. He had been hunting her. Now he was helping? "Go," he hissed, shoving her forward. She didn't need to be told again. She hit the ground running, Lily's tiny hand clutched in hers. Behind her, Dean turned. She heard another gunshot, then a grunt of pain. She didn't look back. She couldn't afford to. She sprinted between the warehouses, her lungs burning, her mind racing. Dean had saved her. But why? Then she heard it, a car engine roaring to life. Her stomach dropped. They weren't running anymore. They were being chased. A black SUV skidded into view, tires screeching against the pavement. The headlights washed over her like a spotlight. Trevor was behind the wheel. His face was a mask of fury, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. Julia yanked Lily into the nearest alley, her mind spinning. She couldn't outrun a car. She needed a plan. Now. Her eyes darted to a chain-link fence at the end of the alley, barely visible in the dim light. Tall, but climbable. She ran. The SUV slammed to a stop at the mouth of the alley, doors flying open. "Get them!" Julia pushed Lily toward the fence. "Climb, baby!" Lily hesitated. Now, Lily scrambled up, her tiny fingers gripping the cold metal. Julia was right behind her. Footsteps pounded against the pavement, too close. Julia reached the top of the fence just as a hand grabbed her ankle. She gasped, twisting violently. Trevor's face loomed below her, his grip vice-like. "You really thought you could run from me?" he snarled. Julia kicked. Hard. Her foot connected with his face. Trevor cursed, stumbling back just enough for her to swing herself over the edge. She hit the ground with a painful thud, but didn't stop. She grabbed Lily and bolted. A river glistened ahead. Dark, deep, their only chance. She heard Trevor shouting behind her. But she didn't stop. She didn't hesitate. She ran straight for the water. And jumped. Every escape leads to another trap. But is Dean an ally, or just another threat? Stay tuned, because the next choice Julia makes might be her last. The icy river swallowed Julia Carter whole. The shock hit first, a violent, bone-deep cold that stole her breath. The world blurred into a churning mass of darkness and water. She fought against the current, arms burning, lungs screaming for air. Then, Lily. Julia twisted, frantic. The little girl surfaced a few feet away, gasping, her tiny arms flailing. "Mommy!" Julia surged forward, ignoring the searing pain in her ribs. She grabbed Lily, pulling her close, her own body shielding her daughter from the crushing waves. Above them, voices shouted. She barely caught glimpses through the rain. Trevor at the edge of the dock, his face twisted in fury. "Find them." A flashlight beam slashed across the water. Julia sucked in a breath and went under. Lily's small hands clung to her shirt as they sank, bubbles streaming past. Julia kicked hard, pushing them deeper, letting the darkness swallow them whole. The current yanked at them, pulling them further from the dock. Good. Let it take us. Her lungs burned. Her vision dimmed. She held on. Just a few more seconds. Then she burst through the surface, dragging in a desperate gulp of air. The dock was behind them now. Distant. But the search wasn't over. A boat engine roared to life. Her chest tightened. They were coming. Julia turned, scanning the riverbank. They needed to get out of the water, fast. The shoreline was uneven, lined with jagged rocks and patches of reeds. But there, a break in the trees. She swam toward it, her body numb, her breath shallow. Lily whimpered. "I'm so cold." "I know, baby," Julia panted. "Hold on." The boat's searchlight cut across the water. There! A gunshot cracked. Water exploded inches from Julia's shoulder. Panic surged through her, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Another shot. Closer. Then a shadow moved on the riverbank. Someone was waiting for them. She barely had time to react before a pair of hands yanked her from the water. She kicked, thrashed, until she heard the voice. "Stop! It's me!" Dean. Julia gasped, sucking in air as he dragged her and Lily onto the muddy shore. Her body collapsed, muscles trembling uncontrollably. Dean crouched beside them, eyes scanning the river. "You're lucky I got here first." Julia's mind was a blur of exhaustion and distrust. "How did you?" "I knew Trevor would send them after you." His voice was low, urgent. "I didn't sign up for this, Julia. I was just supposed to watch over things, make sure the deal went smoothly. But this—" He shook his head. "Trevor's lost it." Julia forced herself up, still gripping Lily. "Why are you helping us?" Dean hesitated, then, barely above a whisper, "Because I have a daughter too." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the boat's engine roared closer. Dean's jaw tightened. "We don't have time. Come on." He grabbed Julia's arm, pulling her to her feet. She could barely stand. "Where are we going?" she asked. Dean didn't answer. He just led them into the trees, moving fast, keeping low. Behind them, the boat's spotlight swept over the riverbank. "They're on shore." A new surge of adrenaline pushed Julia forward. Branches scratched at her arms, mud clung to her feet, but she didn't stop. Dean pulled them behind a rusted-out truck, hidden in the tall grass. He dug into his pocket, yanking out a set of keys. Julia's breath caught. "You have a car?" Dean nodded toward the old vehicle. "It's not much, but it'll get you out of here." Julia stared at him. "You're not coming?" Dean exhaled. "If I run, Trevor will know I helped you. But if I stay—" He hesitated. "I can buy you time." Julia's stomach twisted. "You're risking your life," she whispered. Dean looked at Lily, then back at her. "So are you." Footsteps pounded in the distance. Dean shoved the keys into her hand. "Go. Now." Julia hesitated, just for a second. Then, gripping Lily tight, she scrambled into the truck. Dean slammed the door shut. "Drive. Don't stop." Julia's fingers shook as she twisted the key. The engine coughed, sputtered, then roared to life. Dean turned, just as flashlights pierced through the trees. "He's with them." Gunfire erupted. Dean dove behind the truck as bullets tore through the grass. Julia's heart pounded. She had to go. With a sharp breath, she slammed her foot on the gas. The truck lurched forward, bouncing over the uneven ground. Lily buried her face against Julia's side. Dean's silhouette disappeared in the rearview mirror, engulfed in darkness, gunfire, and chaos. Julia's throat tightened. She didn't know if he would survive. But she knew one thing. Trevor Blake wouldn't stop hunting them. And this wasn't over. Not yet. What's more terrifying, running for your life or knowing that no matter how far you go, the past will always find you? Keep reading, because some ghosts never rest. The truck's tires skidded over the wet asphalt, the engine groaning with every turn. Julia Carter gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. The cold air blasted through the shattered passenger window, cutting through her soaked clothes. Her heart pounded against her ribs. She stole a glance at Lily, curled in the seat beside her, eyes shut tight, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of Julia's torn blouse. "Baby, stay with me," Julia whispered, her voice hoarse. "We're almost safe." She didn't believe it. The gas pedal trembled beneath her foot as she pushed the speedometer past 60. The truck was old, unsteady, barely holding together. The side mirror was cracked, but she could still see the faint glow of headlights in the distance. Trevor wasn't giving up. Her pulse spiked. They had to disappear. Now. She scanned the road ahead. The highway stretched endlessly, flanked by towering pine trees and thick fog rolling off the hills. She didn't know this area, she didn't know where she was going, but stopping wasn't an option. A road sign flashed past. Next gas 20 miles. They wouldn't make it that far. The fuel gauge was sinking fast. Julia clenched her jaw. Damn it. Her mind raced. They needed to ditch the truck before Trevor caught up. But where? Then, through the mist, she saw it. A narrow dirt road cutting into the trees. A hiding spot. She twisted the wheel hard. The truck veered off the highway, tires bouncing over rough gravel. The headlights carved a path through the darkness, illuminating the dense woods ahead. Lily stirred. "Mommy?" "Shh, baby," Julia whispered. "We're almost there." The truck rumbled down the path, engine protesting. Then, a clearing. An old barn loomed ahead, its wooden frame barely standing. The roof sagged, ivy creeping up the sides. A perfect place to disappear. Julia slammed the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop. She killed the engine. The silence was deafening. For a long moment, she didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, distant tires crunching on gravel, her stomach clenched. They were coming. She unbuckled Lily, lifting her into her arms. The little girl was shaking. "Mommy, I'm scared." Julia pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I know, sweetheart, but I need you to be brave for just a little longer, okay?" Lily nodded against her shoulder. Julia slipped out of the truck, keeping low, moving fast. Her body ached, exhaustion clawing at her, but she pushed forward. She had to. The barn doors groaned as she slipped inside. The air was thick with dust and the scent of old wood. Dark, quiet, hidden. She crept to the back, crouching behind a stack of hay bales. Lily clung to her, silent, small. Outside, the distant growl of an approaching engine. Then, headlights. The beams sliced through the cracks in the barn's wooden walls, illuminating the dust swirling in the air. Julia held her breath. The engine idled. A car door opened. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Julia's pulse roared in her ears, a voice low, amused. "You really think you can hide from me, Jules?" Trevor, her fingers curled around the rusted metal rod lying beside her. A weapon. Not much, but enough. Another step. Closer. "All that running, all that fighting, for what?" Trevor continued, his tone almost casual. "You should have taken the deal." Silence. Then, Lily whimpered. Julia's blood turned to ice. The footsteps stopped. Trevor exhaled a slow, amused sigh. "There you are." Light shifted. A shadow stretched across the barn floor. Julia braced herself. Trevor took another step. Then a gunshot. A window shattered. Trevor cursed, stumbling back. More gunfire. Julia grabbed Lily and ran. A second voice, urgent. "Julia, move!" He was here. Another gunshot rang out. Trevor snarled, retreating. "This isn't over." Julia bolted through the back entrance, Dean covering them. The truck. It was their only chance. "Go!" Dean shouted. Julia threw the door open, shoving Lily inside. The truck roared to life. Dean fired one last shot before diving into the passenger seat. "Drive!" Julia slammed her foot on the gas. The barn shrank behind them, swallowed by darkness. For the first time in hours, they were free. But as the road stretched ahead, one thought lingered in Julia's mind. Trevor Blake didn't know how to lose, and she knew he wasn't done with them yet. What's worse, an enemy you can see, or the one who disappears into the dark, waiting for the right moment to strike? Stay tuned, because this game is far from over. The truck's headlights cut through the thick fog, illuminating the winding road ahead. Julia Carter's hands trembled against the wheel, her grip iron tight. Every muscle in her body ached, her ribs screaming in protest with every shallow breath. But she didn't slow down. She couldn't. Lily had finally fallen asleep, curled up in the passenger seat with Dean's jacket draped over her small frame. Her tiny hands twitched in restless dreams, and Julia fought back the guilt twisting in her stomach. She shouldn't have to sleep like this, on the run, in fear. Beside her, Dean sat stiffly, one hand pressed against his bleeding side. His face was pale, his breath shallow. "You're going to bleed out," Julia muttered, eyes flicking between the road and him. Dean smirked weakly. "I've had worse." She clenched her jaw. "That's not comforting." His gaze softened slightly. "You should have left me back there." Julia exhaled sharply, keeping her focus on the road. "And let you die?" "No." Dean let out a low chuckle, but it quickly turned into a grimace. "You really think we're in the clear?" Julia didn't answer, because she didn't believe that. The truck coughed as it struggled up a steep incline, the old engine rattling. The gas gauge flickered dangerously close to empty. "We won't get far," she admitted. "We need somewhere to stop." Dean scanned the landscape through the fog. "There's a town a few miles ahead. If we're lucky, we can lay low for a few hours." Julia nodded, but deep down she knew the truth. There was no laying low. Trevor Blake wasn't the type to let things go. He'd come for them, again and again. A shiver crawled down her spine. She tightened her grip on the wheel and pressed forward. The town was small, a collection of dimly lit buildings tucked against the edge of a forest. A gas station, a diner, a few scattered houses. Julia pulled into the lot of an old motel. The neon sign flickered, buzzing against the silence. She shut off the engine. Dean groaned, struggling to sit up. "I'll get the room." Julia shook her head. "You're in no condition to move. Stay with Lily." Dean hesitated, then gave a small nod. Julia slipped out of the truck, her limbs screaming in protest. Every step toward the motel office felt heavier than the last. Inside, a tired-looking clerk barely glanced up from his magazine. "Need a room?" "Yeah, one night. Cash." He raised an eyebrow but didn't ask questions. He slid a key across the counter. "Room 6. Julia forced a small nod. snatched the key, and headed back outside. Something felt off. The air was too still, too quiet. Her pulse quickened. She turned sharply, scanning the street. The gas station across the road was empty. No movement. No cars. Then, a shadow shifted in the alley beside the motel. Julia's breath hitched. She moved fast, gripping the truck door and whispering urgently, "Dean, get Lily inside. Now." Dean snapped to attention despite his pain. He grabbed Lily, still half asleep, and pulled her into his arms. Julia flung the motel door open. "Go." Dean staggered inside, Lily clutching his shirt, her sleepy murmurs muffled by his shoulder. Julia turned just in time to see a figure emerging from the alley. Her heart nearly stopped. Trevor. He wasn't rushing. He didn't need to. His posture was relaxed, confident. A predator who knew his prey had nowhere left to run. "Jules," he called, his voice smooth, mocking. "You can't run forever." Julia stepped back, her body tense. "Stay away from my daughter." Trevor sighed, shaking his head. "I never wanted to bring her into this. But you left me no choice." Her nails dug into her palms. "I don't believe that." He took another step closer. "You were supposed to be leverage," he continued. "A bargaining chip. But you just had to make things difficult, didn't you?" She swallowed hard. "Let's make a deal," he offered. "You come with me. No more running, no more hiding, and in return your little girl gets to live a normal life." Julia's stomach twisted. She knew Trevor, knew his lies. If she went with him, Lily wouldn't be safe. None of them would. She had seconds to decide. Then, a gunshot. The bullet whizzed past Trevor's shoulder, embedding itself into the motel sign. Trevor barely flinched. His smirk only widened. Julia's head snapped toward the source. Dean. He stood in the doorway, gun raised, his body shaking from blood loss. "Walk away," Dean rasped. "Now." Trevor tilted his head. "You don't have the strength to pull that trigger." Dean's hand didn't waver. "Try me." For a long moment, no one moved. Then finally, Trevor took a step back, his eyes locked onto Julia's. "This isn't over." Then, he disappeared into the night. Julia let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Dean swayed. She rushed forward, catching him before he collapsed. "That was reckless," she muttered. Dean chuckled weakly. "Yeah, but it worked, didn't it?" Julia glanced at the empty street. "No, it didn't." Trevor wasn't gone. He was just waiting for his next move. What's worse, knowing you're being hunted, or realizing the person you love might be the reason why? Keep reading, because the truth is always the deadliest weapon. The motel room was small, barely enough space for the three of them. The air was thick with the scent of dust and old linens, the faded wallpaper peeling at the edges. But Julia Carter didn't care. For now, they had walls, a door, a lock. She eased Lily onto the bed, tucking Dean's jacket around her. The little girl barely stirred, exhaustion pulling her under. At least one of them could sleep. Dean groaned as he slumped against the wall, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his shirt, dark and wet. "Let me see," Julia said, kneeling beside him. Dean gave a weak chuckle. "You're not a doctor." "Well, you're not dead yet," she muttered, peeling back the fabric. A nasty gash ran along his ribs, but it wasn't deep enough to be fatal. She grabbed the motel's first aid kit from the nightstand, hands steady despite the way her heart was pounding. "You ever done this before?" Dean asked. Julia met his gaze. "No." "Great," he muttered. She ignored him and pressed a towel against the wound. He hissed through his teeth but didn't pull away. "You shouldn't have shot at him," she whispered. Dean exhaled. "You'd rather I let him take you?" She didn't answer. Because for a moment back there, she had considered it. Not because she trusted Trevor, not because she believed his lies, but because she knew one thing with absolute certainty: this wasn't over. Trevor wasn't the kind of man to walk away. He was still out there, somewhere in the dark, waiting for them to let their guard down, and when he came back, he wouldn't give her a choice. Dean grunted as she tightened the bandage. "We need a plan." Julia nodded, but she didn't know where to start. Their truck was useless, out of gas and easy to track. Dean was in no shape to run, and calling the cops, that was a joke. Trevor had connections everywhere. "I know someone," Dean said suddenly. Julia frowned. "Someone who can help?" Dean's jaw tightened. "Someone who might, but it's a risk." She sighed, pressing a hand against her temple. "Everything is a risk." Dean hesitated, then said, "There's a guy in the next town. Ex-cop. Used to be on Trevor's payroll, but they had a falling out. If he's willing to talk, he might have something on him. Something we can use." Julia considered it. It was a long shot, But what other choice did they have? Before she could answer, a noise outside made her freeze. A car. Slow. Creeping. Dean tensed. Turn off the light. Julia moved fast, flicking the switch. Darkness swallowed the room. She crept to the window, carefully pulling back the curtain. A black sedan idled in the parking lot, its headlights off. Her stomach twisted. Trevor? A door opened. A man stepped out. Julia held her breath, watching as he walked toward the motel office. His movements were calm, unhurried. Doesn't look like Trevor, she whispered. Dean shifted painfully. Could be one of his guys? She nodded. Then the man turned slightly and she caught a glimpse of his face. Her blood ran cold. She knew him. Not from Trevor. Not from the kidnappers. From Michael. He was one of her husband's old business partners, a man she had met years ago at a company event. And now, he was here. Dean must have seen the change in her expression. Who is he? Julia swallowed hard. Someone from Michael's past. Dean cursed under his breath. The man reached the motel office. Julia watched as he spoke to the clerk, slipping something across the counter. Money. Bribing him. A moment later, the clerk pointed toward their room. Julia's heart lurched. They know we're here, she whispered. Dean struggled to sit up. We have to go. Now. Julia turned back to Lily. The little girl was still asleep, her tiny chest rising and falling steadily. She hated to wake her. Hated that this was her life now. But they had no time. She lifted Lily into her arms, whispering softly. Baby, we have to go. Lily stirred, eyes fluttering open. Footsteps outside, getting closer. Dean grabbed his gun, wincing as he moved. Back door? Julia nodded. She moved quickly, pushing through the bathroom and into the narrow service hallway. The motel's back exit was ahead, a flickering red exit sign glowing in the dark. Behind them, a knock at the door. Then Trevor's voice. Julia. She stiffened. He was here. Again. And this time, he wasn't alone. Dean shoved the door open and they slipped into the cold night. Julia didn't look back. But she knew one thing for certain. Trevor Blake wasn't just chasing them. He was hunting them. And if they didn't stop him first, he would never stop. What's worse, running from a killer or realizing the person you love might have created him? Stay tuned, because the past always comes back for you. The night air was sharp, cutting against Julia Carter's skin as she ran. Lily was cradled in her arms, her small face buried against Julia's shoulder. Behind her, Dean limped forward, his breath ragged, his hand pressed against his wounded side. The distant rumble of engines sent ice through Julia's veins. Trevor's men weren't far. They had to move. The narrow alley behind the motel led them to a side street, empty, quiet, but only for now. Every shadow felt like a trap. Dean winced as he leaned against a rusted dumpster, struggling to catch his breath. We need a car. Julia scanned the street. A gas station sat at the corner, its flickering neon light barely illuminating the lot. A single vehicle, a battered gray sedan, was parked near the pump. It was empty, keys dangling in the ignition, a mistake or a trap. Dean followed her gaze. You thinking what I'm thinking? She hesitated. If we take it and it's theirs, they'll kill us either way? Dean muttered. Julia tightened her grip on Lily. He wasn't wrong. She made the decision. Stay here, she whispered. Dean shook his head. Not happening. But she was already moving. She sprinted toward the car, heart hammering against her ribs. The gas station door was propped open, the cashier distracted, watching something on a small TV. Julia reached the driver's side, took a breath, then a noise behind her. Footsteps, too fast, too close. She spun just as a figure lunged. A gloved hand closed around her wrist, yanking her backward. She hit the pavement hard. Stars exploded behind her eyes. A voice, low, cold. Going somewhere? Her vision cleared. A man towered over her, not Trevor, but someone just as dangerous. One of his men. His grip tightened, dragging her up. Julia twisted violently, kicking out. Her knee connected with his ribs. He grunted, stumbling back, just enough. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed the gun from his belt. He realized too late. She fired. The gunshot shattered the silence. The man crumpled. Julia gasped for air, her body shaking. Then, Lily screamed. Julia's head snapped toward the alley. Dean was down. Trevor was standing over him. The world blurred. Trevor's cold eyes met hers. Drop the gun, he said. Julia's fingers tightened around the grip. Trevor took a step closer. You won't shoot me. She wanted to. She needed to. But Lily, Trevor's gaze flickered toward the little girl. You think I'd hurt her? His voice was smooth, convincing, lying. That's not what this is about, Julia, he said. It never was. Julia's breath came fast, sharp. Then what is it? Trevor smirked. Ask your husband. A fresh wave of dread washed over her. What do you mean? Trevor tilted his head. You really don't know, do you? Julia's grip faltered. Trevor smiled. Michael wasn't innocent in any of this. He made a deal with the wrong people, and when things went south, he did what he always does. He stepped closer. He ran. The truth hit like a knife to the gut. Michael had known about Trevor, about all of it. He had never told her. Trevor's voice dropped lower. And now you're running too, just like him. Julia's mind raced. Was he lying? Or had Michael really left them to clean up his mess? Her hands trembled. Trevor saw it. You're tired, Julia. You're scared, but you don't have to be. Come with me. Lily whimpered. Julia swallowed hard. She could feel it, the moment balancing on a knife's edge. Then Dean moved. It happened fast. Dean slammed into Trevor, knocking him sideways. A second. That's all Julia needed. She grabbed Lily and ran. Dean's voice rang out. Go! But she hesitated. Trevor twisted, grabbing Dean's wounded side. Dean gritted his teeth, eyes locking onto Julia's. I said, go. A gunshot. Julia flinched. She didn't look back. She ran. The car was still there, the door hanging open. She threw Lily inside. The engine roared to life. She saw the fight in the rearview mirror. Dean was still up, barely. Trevor turned, spotting her. She floored the gas. The tires screamed. Trevor dove out of the way just in time. Then he was behind her, in the past. Julia's hands were shaking. Lily sobbed softly in the seat beside her. They were alive, for now. But the truth clung to Julia's mind like a sickness. Michael knew. He had always known. And Trevor wasn't after her. He was after something else. Something Michael had taken. And now he was willing to burn everything down to get it back. Some battles end in escape, others end in blood. Which one will this be? Keep reading, because the final choice is coming. The road stretched endlessly ahead, a dark ribbon cutting through the silent landscape. The engine of the stolen sedan hummed beneath Julia Carter's trembling hands, her knuckles white against the wheel. Every muscle in her body ached, exhaustion pressing down like a heavy weight. Beside her, Lily stirred, her small face still damp with tears. Her breathing had steadied, but her tiny fingers remained curled in the fabric of Julia's sleeve. Even in sleep, she wouldn't let go. The night had swallowed everything behind them, the motel, the fight, Dean. Julia's chest tightened. She should have stayed, should have helped, but Dean had made the choice for her, and now she didn't even know if he was alive. A sign flashed past. Next exit. 2 miles. Julia's mind raced. She couldn't keep driving blind. She needed a plan, and answers. Her hands tightened on the wheel. Michael. The thought of her husband sent a sharp jolt of anger through her. Trevor hadn't been after her. He hadn't even been after money. He wanted something Michael stole. And Michael had never told her. Not once. She swallowed down the rising fury. Right now, emotions wouldn't help her. She needed to think. The exit approached. A gas station sat at the edge of an empty lot, its lone streetlight flickering against the darkness. It was risky to stop, but the fuel gauge was dangerously close to empty. She pulled in, killing the engine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Julia glanced at Lily. She couldn't leave her alone. Lily stirred. Mommy? Julia brushed damp hair from her face. I need to go inside for a minute. Can you stay here? Lily's grip on her tightened. No. Julia exhaled. All right, come on. She lifted Lily into her arms, ignoring the way her body protested. The gas station was empty except for the clerk behind the counter, a thin, tired-looking man who barely glanced up as they entered. Julia grabbed a bottle of water and approached the register. Do you have a payphone? The clerk nodded toward the back. She set down cash and turned toward the phone, but her gut twisted. A reflection in the window, a black sedan, parked at the edge of the lot, not moving. Her pulse spiked. She grabbed Lily's hand. We need to go. The moment they stepped outside, the car door opened. A man stepped out, not Trevor, Michael. Julia's breath caught. For a moment, the world stopped. He looked the same, suit rumpled, dark eyes scanning her with an expression she couldn't read. She couldn't move, couldn't speak. Then he took a step closer. Julia, he said, his voice calm, almost relieved. Thank God. I've been looking everywhere for you. She took a step back, shielding Lily behind her. Stay away. Michael's expression faltered. Julia, please. We don't have time for this. Anger burned through her exhaustion. No, Michael. What we don't have time for is your lies. Michael exhaled, rubbing his temple. I can explain. Then do it, she snapped. Because Trevor's been trying to kill me, and according to him, it's your fault. Michael's jaw tightened. That was all the confirmation she needed. Julia, get in the car, he said, his voice firmer now. I can protect you. Both of you. She let out a bitter laugh. Like you protected us before? Michael sighed. I didn't want you involved. Her blood boiled. You didn't want me involved? Michael, I was kidnapped. Our daughter was nearly killed. And you. Her voice cracked. You let this happen. His face darkened. I didn't have a choice. Julia's hands clenched into fists. What did you do? Michael hesitated. Then softly, I stole from them. Her stomach dropped. What? Michael swallowed hard. Trevor wasn't just a business partner. He was laundering money for people, dangerous people. I found out, and I took it before they could. Julia felt like the ground beneath her had disappeared. You stole from the mafia. Michael's silence was answer enough. Julia's breath came fast, ragged. You lied to me, she whispered. I was trying to keep you safe, he said. I thought if I got far enough away. She let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Well, congratulations, Michael, you failed. Lily whimpered. Julia felt her tiny fingers tighten around her sleeve. Michael exhaled. We can fix this. Julia shook her head. No, you can fix this. His eyes darkened. Julia, you don't understand. A noise cut through the night. A car engine. Fast. Approaching. Julia's stomach twisted. Michael's head snapped toward the road. His face paled. It's them. The black SUV came into view. Trevor. Julia grabbed Lily and ran. Michael cursed, pulling a gun from his jacket. A second later, gunfire. Glass shattered. Tires screeched. Michael fired again, ducking behind his car. Get in! Julia hesitated. She didn't trust him. Not anymore. But Trevor was almost here. She had no choice. She shoved Lily inside and climbed in. Michael hit the gas. The tires spun, smoke rising. The SUV followed. Julia's heart pounded as she looked out the window. Trevor was behind them, his expression cold, unshaken. Michael's grip tightened on the wheel. I'm getting you out of this, he swore. Julia's gaze locked on him, and for the first time in their marriage, she wasn't sure if he was her savior or her biggest mistake. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to stick around, because more incredible stories are coming. And remember, not every escape is a victory. Some are just the beginning of another chase. The car hurtled down the empty highway, its headlights carving a path through the darkness. Julia Carter sat rigid in the passenger seat, her mind racing faster than the speedometer. Lily slept in the back, curled up under Dean's blood-stained jacket. Michael's grip on the wheel was tight, his knuckles pale. They won't stop, he muttered. Julia's jaw clenched. That's something we agree on. Behind them, Trevor's SUV loomed in the distance. Not close enough to catch them yet, but not far enough to lose either. Julia exhaled slowly. Tell me the truth, Michael, all of it. Michael's fingers twitched against the wheel. Julia. Now. For a moment he didn't speak. Then he let out a breath, his voice lower than before. I didn't just steal money. His eyes flickered toward her, guilt etched into his features. I stole proof. Julia's stomach twisted. Proof of what? Michael hesitated. Trevor wasn't working alone. He was laundering money for someone bigger. People with power. People who don't like loose ends. Julia's breath hitched. The mafia. Michael nodded. I found records, transactions, names, accounts offshore. I was going to turn them over to the feds, but I got scared. Julia let out a bitter laugh. You got scared? So instead of exposing them, you thought stealing from them was a better idea? I thought if I disappeared, they'd forget about me. Julia shook her head. And you dragged us into it instead. Michael's grip tightened. I never meant for you to get hurt. But we did. The words hung between them, heavy and unshakable. A sharp beam of headlights flooded the rearview mirror. Trevor was closing in. Michael cursed. We're running out of time. Julia's mind raced. Where's the proof? In a safe deposit box, Michael admitted. City National Bank, downtown. Julia inhaled sharply. So that's why Trevor wants you alive. Michael nodded. He doesn't care about me. He cares about what I have. A realization settled deep in Julia's bones. Trevor wouldn't stop, not as long as the evidence existed. And that meant, we have to end this, Julia whispered. Michael's eyes darted toward her. What are you saying? She met his gaze, her voice unwavering. We stop running. We take this to the FBI. Michael looked like she had slapped him. You don't understand. These people. I don't care, Julia cut him off. I'm not spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder. Lily deserves better. We deserve better. Michael swallowed hard, his hands tightening on the wheel. Trevor's SUV surged forward. The decision was made for them. Michael jerked the wheel, swerving onto an exit ramp. Tires screeched. Julia grabbed Lily, shielding her as the car bounced over the pavement. They barreled into downtown, bright lights, towering buildings, crowded streets. Trevor followed. Michael's breath was ragged. We can't outrun them here. Julia's pulse pounded. We don't have to. Her eyes locked onto a police station at the next intersection. Turn right, now. Michael's jaw tightened. Then with a sharp nod, he cut the wheel. They skidded into the parking lot, headlights flashing against the station's glass doors. Trevor's SUV screeched to a halt behind them. For a split second, everything was still. Then, Julia moved. She yanked the car door open and ran. Lily in her arms, heart pounding, sprinting toward the entrance. The doors burst open, officers stepping out, guns drawn. Behind her, Trevor cursed. Michael stumbled out of the car, hands raised. Trevor hesitated. Julia turned, breathless, watching him. For the first time, he wasn't in control. He was trapped. Sirens wailed in the distance. Trevor's jaw clenched. His eyes met Julia's. And then, he ran. Julia collapsed onto the pavement, holding Lily close. It was over. For the first time in days, she could breathe. 3 weeks later, Julia sat across from Michael in a cold interrogation room. The FBI had the files. The entire operation was exposed. Trevor had disappeared, but his empire had crumbled. Michael, however, wasn't walking away. You're turning yourself in, Julia said quietly. Michael's expression was unreadable. It's the right thing to do. She studied him. The man she had trusted. The man she had loved. I don't know if I can forgive you, she admitted. Michael nodded. I don't expect you to. Silence stretched between them. Then Michael swallowed hard. But Julia. His voice softened. I never stopped loving you. She inhaled sharply, blinking back tears. I don't know what happens next, she whispered. Michael exhaled. Then take it. She stood, holding his gaze for one last moment. Then she turned and walked away. The sun was setting as Julia sat on the porch, watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard. A new town. A new beginning. The past wasn't gone. But it no longer controlled her. Dean had survived. He was healing, and for the first time so was she. Trevor was still out there. Maybe he always would be. But Julia wasn't running anymore. She had won, and this time she wasn't afraid. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to stick around, because more incredible stories are coming. Subscribe now, and don't miss what's next.